Shalom, shalom, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Pulse of Israel here in our eternal and ancestral homeland, the land of Israel, in our beautiful, biblical, indigenous, and indivisible capital, Jerusalem, since King David's time. Today I want to share with you an unbelievable interview I did with a special and important person who I grew up talking about, hearing about, protesting about, praying about, and it was an unbelievable opportunity and blessing to be able to interview him here in Jerusalem, in our Jerusalem studio. So everyone, sit back, enjoy. We go really deep on many issues, and I was just blown, my own mind was blown to be able to hear the insight of Mr. Yehonatan Pollard. Enjoy, everybody. Shalom Aleichem. Welcome, Yehonatan.
It's a pleasure being here.
It is wonderful having the opportunity to talk to you. I mean, I mentioned to you as a child, I was out in the streets protesting and praying.
Thank you.
And I want to give people some context. Before I start asking you about the state of the Jewish people in the land of Israel today, and the state of Israel, because you have become much more open and vocal with your own thoughts and opinions and insights. And if I'm not mistaken, you even mentioned you might even think about going into Israeli politics. I don't know if that's fake news or not.
I hope to.
You hope to? Okay. But the first question I'm going to ask really is why? Because one of the first things you said when you were freed and brought to Israel was that you're keeping your mouth closed and not getting involved in Israeli politics.
What happened? I was first confronted with the serious possibility of being an MK, Chevra Knesset, by my friend Itamar Ben-Gvir. And we are close personal friends. And I guess he got tired of waiting for me to get off the fence. And this was right after my previous wife, Alea Shalom, had died. So I wasn't in a very good headspace for politics at the time. So I woke up one Friday morning to find myself appointed the number 2 in Otzma.
Oh, wow.
And I was, honored, but I couldn't do it. So I thanked Itamar, and I went out with a press release, which said 2 things, only one of which was actually covered. The first thing I said was, I've suffered enough. So everybody thought that was funny. But the second thing I said was, having said that, I nevertheless feel that I'm the most appropriate candidate for the Knesset because I've already been to prison.
No.
That didn't get me any friends in
politics.
But that's me. I'm not politically correct. So during the intervening time, I've now become the head of 4 startups, and I've inherited 7 children with my new wife,
wow.
Rivka, who was introduced to me by my dying wife at the time.
Wow.
And who did the shidduch also. She did, Esther did the shidduch.
Wow.
Between us. And when I asked her, look, I'm an old married guy, and when she asked me, do you like her? I could hear the trap getting ready to be sprung. So I said, why do you ask such a question? And she said, because I'm not going to make it, and I want you to be happy.
Wow.
So that's who she was. And I couldn't be happier now, although I was surprised to inherit 7 children, 6 girls.
Wow.
And I'm scared to death of them. These are Israeli girls, many of them whom are red-haired and green-eyed, and they have tempers to go with it. But they're all smart. They're all good girls. And I'm very proud to be their new father. So Esther, when she was, literally I was holding her, counting her last breaths. And she gathered her strength to say one last thing to me. And she said, what is politics? And I said to her, sweetie, you're not going to live long enough for me to give you the full academic answer. So she kind of smiled mirthlessly. And she said, well, let me give you the short answer. It's the art of compromise. what are you willing to compromise? The Machpelah, Hebron itself, Kever Yosef, Harival.
And these are all places in Judea and Samaria, holy sites of the Jewish people.
Holy centers.
Right.
And she said, what are you willing to compromise on? Shabbat, Kashrut, what? Gills, what? And I said, nothing. I can't compromise on anything. And she said, good. Remember that. And then she took the dive. And that was it. So that was the last, with her last reserves of strength. That's what she wanted to talk to me about. And this is why, no matter what, I cannot and will not compromise. This is our God-given land. I do not believe for a moment that we should be asking anyone for permission to do anything in this land. We have to do what is appropriate for our survival and our alliance, if you will, with Hashem. We have been given this land in trust, and we're not allowed to give it away. We're expected to, if necessary, die for it. Al Kiddush Hashem. So this is why, for most conventional politicians, and that is somewhat of a dirty word in my vocabulary, a politician, because they don't hold themselves accountable. This is a problem with our system here. Unlike the United States and other countries that have districts or ridings, whatever they call, our MKs are not accountable in any way, shape, or form to the electorate. So is it any wonder that they just don't care about us? So in a macro sense, that has to change. We need a change in our organization, our political organization on the ground here, to basically force the elected representatives to be accountable to their constituents, not the party leader. So I've made it very clear to anybody who's been interested in having me aboard that I will vote my conscience, and I don't care at all what the threats and the requirements or the obligations I may have to the party leader. I made a bigger obligation and promise to my wife, Esther, alayha shalom. That's where my loyalty is. And she said, remember, before when we were leading up to her going into the hospital for the last time, she said, your constituency is the land and people of Israel, period. No one else, nothing else. And if what you do doesn't serve these interests, then you're doing something wrong. And when I mention this to friends of mine who are in politics, they're polite, but I was trained to look at eyes, and they think I'm a friar. They think I'm naive, and I don't think so. It makes life easier for me. I can look at myself in the mirror. I may be the only one, the outlier, that votes against something, but I'll have kept faith with my wife. I'll have kept faith with my current wife, who subscribes to the same view. And I also will keep faith with the land and people of Israel. Who am I going to keep faith with? Otherwise, a bunch of politicians that have given away our land, that have done things or not done things that resulted in October 7. People that don't know the meaning of the word altruism. I would get into politics basically in order to help. And if I can play a very small role in helping people, tachlis, not verbally, but tachlis, then I think it will have been worth it. I'm trying very hard right now through my businesses to build up the land. And if I go into politics, my poor wife will have to assume that obligation, since I have to divorce myself from any business activities. But I've at least started it. And we'll see where it goes. I've had talks with Itamar. It's a bit premature right now, but look, it's Israel. It could change on a dime. It could change overnight.
Point, but touching from the positive side, from the from the unity of the Jewish people, because the message that I give across to my audience all the time, and I gave across this message specifically during the year of the extremely divisive judicial reform protests, and I was telling them, guys, the Jewish people, we're a united people, but there is a tiny elite minority trying to divide us for their own political, divisive, destructive goals because they are against a true Jewish state of Israel. So, but the positive is...
It's the national identity that they're scared of.
Exactly.
And it's changing.
And it's... so there's the positive. The positive is, and this goes with the timing, that's here too. Majority of the Jewish people in Israel are united. United finally to understand, regardless of our political and religious differences, that there are always going to be political and religious differences, but we are one because our enemies are killing us because of who we are, Jews, and not because of where we live.
As I always say, if you go back and look, remember, who was in the cattle cars? Who were in the cattle cars?
Yeah.
They were everybody. It was a cross-section of Judaism. The Bundes, the Neologues, the Satmars, everybody was there, because to our enemies, we are one target. We are one people. It doesn't matter left, right, or center. We are Jews. This is why, Avi, I got into a very almost physical altercation with some very prominent Rabbonim in this country over what happened in Nova.
Mm-hmm.
They were saying that these people were apikorsum, that they were pagans, there was a Buddha there, whatever. And I listened, and I got up finally in front of a lot of people, and I said, with all due respect, shut your mouths. I said, these people died al Kiddush Hashem.
Yep.
They died because they were Jews. I don't care if they had tattoos on. I don't care if they didn't have a beard. I don't care if they didn't have a kippah. They died because they were Jews. Why is it, I asked them, that in death we find unity? I said, why don't we have unity in life? So, my arguments with the left at the time was actually a forewarning to me of something building up. Why do I say that? I did what I was trained to do. I looked on a spreadsheet, a PowerPoint actually, of everything the left was saying about the Army's inability to fight, unwillingness and inability to fight.
Saying when?
Saying before October 7th.
Okay.
When they were trying to get soldiers to condition their service on the government not adopting.
Right, and they were gleefully boasting how they had 10,000 soldiers plus who said they were going to refuse to serve. Which was a lie,
by the way. I asked a reporter friend of mine, you went out with this story.
Right, 10,
did you check how old the people were? Did you check when their service ended? Well, no, and that's another issue with the...
Yeah, they always lie about their narratives.
About everything. I don't want to say they're lazy. They're liars.
No, they're very calculated and know how to manipulate the masses by spreading lies.
I looked at everything that was being
said. But before you continue, I want to clarify, because I think this goes exactly what we're saying. We're not talking about a political camp. Like, again, majority of the Jewish population in Israel, there's no more right or left anymore. But there's a tiny minority elite that manipulates. Exactly. And they're part of the leftist camp, but they don't represent
that's otherwise known
the majority of the people.
As the deep state. And it's a very thin crust in the judiciary, in academia, in the media, and in the bureaucracy.
And in the military.
That's another issue that I think I told you I was very much involved with when I came here. In fact, the first issue that I discussed to a group of high-ranking officers was a scenario involving the invasion of Gaza. I'll tell you about that. That was very interesting. But to conclude, what happened was I looked at all these statements that were coming out, and I looked at what Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran were saying about them. they're believing this.
Right.
And then I looked on the map at where all these demonstrations against our fence line were occurring, where they were trying to blow holes in the fence, and where scouts were cutting through the fence.
Hamas scouts in Gaza.
Hamas scouts, and waiting
to see what our reaction
on the
would be.
other side of the fence, looking at their watches. And I said, oh my God. And about a week before the invasion, there was a remarkable video of a huge military parade in Gaza with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas. I saw weapons there that I had no idea they had. And at the end, there was this message that kind of came through the smoke and materialized soon. So I went in to talk to people immediately. And I was accused of being an alarmist and a warmonger.
Again, this is all pre-October 7th.
Pre-October 7th. And I suddenly realized I am talking to the very people that I had been criticizing ever since I came home. There they are, in the flesh, in front of me. Completely resistant to a sense of obligation to the state, professionalism, whatever you want to call it. They were Osloists to their core.
Yep.
So when the invasion came, it was with a very heavy heart that I looked at where exactly they came across. And it was exactly where I had put the X's on the maps. So if we have a credible and honest commission of inquiry, which right now I'm on record as saying there's no way that's going to happen.
No way they're going to let it happen. No way the justice system, no way the top head.
No, never.
The military.
Never.
That's why we have to have a civilian citizen.
Look,
like
here's the problem.
To get it all up.
The military here doesn't seem to understand that they serve the government. When I've read...
It's not that they don't want to... That's not...
They
believe they are military leaders who have a country, and they specifically do not. But I want to take you on that point, because I've always been very critical of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu all these years,
I have also,
as you have.
Yes.
But I want to hear your thoughts on this context that I give, because whenever I try to talk about the challenges that Netanyahu has as Prime Minister and trying to do what is necessary to defend Israel, both now and long term, I always say not only is he up against extremely powerful international forces that are always trying to weaken Israel and endanger Israel, including our ally, the United States of America.
Our frenemy,
right?
Yeah.
And again, I try to explain to the people that it's not just Biden, but it's a foreign policy establishment that's been for decades.
And an intelligence establishment as well, which
you can go into. We'll get into that.
Which I know.
But at the same time, I explain to people, I believe, and this is what I want to hear your 2 cents about, that Netanyahu disappoints us plenty of times because he knows that he has a military intelligence security establishment that will not follow his orders, even if he gives the orders to do what is necessary, and he's always trying to walking a tightrope of the international pressures, White House pressures, as well as pressures within Israel, the tiny minority elite that believe they're a military and a justice system that run a country and give orders to the government of what to do, and not the other way around.
Let's go back to Bereshit with Bibi. First of all, with him, Bibi has never been able to pull the trigger. He's always been a man of compromise. It doesn't seem that way, but he actually is. And I had a discussion with him concerning that, where he accused me of being the guy that they let out of the cage to handle a difficult problem, and then I returned to the cage. And I said, well, first of all, I'm not an animal. Second of all, these seemingly intractable problems that you just described are your doing. You're doing. So let's have some accountability on that issue. As I explained to him and others, Bibi's principal problem is the fact that he has no yirat shamayim. He has no fear of heaven. It may come as a surprise to people to know that he's not religious at all. I don't want to call the man an atheist, I would be presuming. But if I had to make a characterization of his beliefs, I would call them atheistic. Just like his father, Ben Zion. And because of that, he doesn't understand that there are some times, some moments, that you have to take very difficult steps. So, if he does recognize that fact, what is he up against? Let's forget about the international community, the 800-pound or 8,000-pound elephant in the corner. He has a military establishment that is atrocious. They like the High Court, have a glass ceiling. They kind of self-elect their replacements, which has just happened, by the way.
Yep,
again,
just in the middle of a war. And they specifically did not promote the biggest heroes on the battlefield.
Correct. Of the 50 people promoted, not one of them was religious. You cannot have the individuals responsible for October 7th being responsible for their replacements. Are they acceptable for people, for us now fighting? No, they aren't. Every one of them should have been fired on October 8th. Yep. Starting with Chetzi Halevi all the way down. The other problem for Bibi, and I've been asked this question, is given the fact that Yoav Gallant, our Minister of Defense, Gadi Eisenkot, and Benny Gantz were all responsible for October 7th.
Right.
Why did Bibi bring them into the government?
Right. For those who do not know, all three of them are former senior officials of the IDF over the past 2 decades who are directly responsible, especially Eisenkot and Benny Gantz, for literally weakening the Israeli army, literally cutting units, cutting tanks, cutting supplies, and bringing the Israeli army to be a tiny...
doctrine.
Right.
From an offensive doctrine
to a defensive.
To a defensive one. Mowing the grass.
Right.
Kicking the can down the road.
Right. And based on the fact we're never going to have another war again.
Managing the enemy. Yeah, all of these things. So why did he bring them in?
Right.
Why? And I said, well, it's kind of like a drowning man pulling his would-be rescuer down with him. That Bibi, yes, he was trying to make the appearance of a unity government, but more importantly, he was trying to bring the people he knew were responsible for this catastrophe as close to himself as possible. It's not working because the left is rallying around these people. Why? Because of Bibi derangement syndrome, BDS, as it's called, by Rav David Bar Chaim. So the other major problem with this is that these people are seen more as replacements for Bibi than they are the solution to our problem right now.
Right.
Okay. Bibi is probably a master, if of anything, reading polls. Never seen anybody like it before. So he knows that he has a tailwind, that the country is united on the issue of destroying Hamas, on the issue of bringing the hostages back, generally through offensive action. All of these things. The question I've been asked is, if these polls were more ambiguous and not so clear-cut, what would his policy be? I said it would reflect that fact.
100%.
Right now, Baruch Hashem, thank God for us, he's on firm ground with moving forward against Hamas's last bastion in Rafiah.
Right.
The question, though, and I've spent a lot of time addressing this issue, is what happens the day after? The day after is a disaster. I've read, analyzed, studied everything he has said on the day after. And I'm sorry, but he has to go. Because anything short of depopulation transfer, whatever you want to call it, whatever euphemism.
Voluntary migration.
Voluntary migration.
Opening the Egyptian
whatever,
border.
Whatever you want to say.
Right.
And annexation will simply...
Sovereignty and Jewish resettlement in Gaza.
Right. Will absolutely perpetuate this problem.
Yep.
The last poll that was taken last week showed the overwhelming majority of Gazans still in support of Hamas. Right. So what? If we have a security regime that Bibi wants to establish there, and Gallant wants to establish, we will be like the lid on a boiling pot of water. It doesn't work. We tried this in 1967 in the territories when we thought, okay, we can deal with the radicals by empowering the clans. Well, what happened a week and a half ago? There was one clan leader, the Dagmush clan, that said, okay, we'll take care of distributing the aid, we'll take care of security. Well, guess what happened?
Hamas killed him.
They killed him. And all the rest of them saw this and said, okay, fine, we understand where this is going.
It's the Middle East.
It's the Middle East. So what Bibi is doing now is correct, but what are we doing tying ourselves in knots over this humanitarian issue? This has never been the case in the history of warfare, where a country is supplying, feeding
the enemy
population. It's insane. This is total war. You don't do that in total war. So the Americans, well, the Fremenis, the Biden administration, and their fellow travelers in the Foreign Service establishment and the intelligence community are very cynically using these refugees clustered around Rafah as human shields to prevent us from finishing this war.
Right.
Most people understand this. I'm restating the obvious right now. Why? Because unless and until Bibi understands that if he has to order cutting through these people to get to the enemy in Rafah, he has to do it. These people are not worth saving. Whenever you do a military...
Again, for people that they are being used as human shields and as a strategy by Hamas.
And the West.
In order to stop Israel.
Right. So are we going to allow ourselves to be hamstrung by this? Every day...
We have until now.
Every day, every hour, every minute, every second, we delay going into Rafah because of this humanitarian problem.
Right, which highlights how the world doesn't care about us getting our captives. For a month, they've stopped us, and Bibi has allowed them to stop us.
That's the issue. Stop right there. That's the issue.
Okay, I'm with you.
Okay, that's the issue. So, the smartest thing he could do right now, if I could give him some advice. Get rid of Gantz, get rid of Eisenkot, get rid of Gallant, get rid of Chetzi Halevi, veto all the promotions, get rid of a lot of other people like Haliwa, this one in particular.
All the senior idea, security, intelligence personnel who were responsible for having the intelligence, sitting on the intelligence, not telling Bibi and the government about the intelligence, and then not fulfilling their responsibility to protect Israel and Israelis from the October 7th massacre.
All of the above.
Wow.
And we have enough very fine combat officers
to take over.
Who are at the Tataluf level, at the brigade level.
Right. Who do not get promoted.
Who do not get promoted because
staff.
of their political views or because of their religious views.
So,
whatever.
So I want to take you in an interesting direction now. Okay? I want to take a step back from Bibi, a step back from the specific situation we're in, and I'll use your knowledge and experience to help people understand, because I try to do this, help people understand the 8,000-pound gorilla we are dealing with, not just the Israeli people, but the American people, against a deep state within military intelligence who are working against the interests of our peoples. Again, not just Israel, but also American. And again, I've spoken about this before, giving just people context to hear your insight. One, I started talking and understanding there's a deep state within Israel's military intelligence complex back in the early 1990s, because when Rabin was assassinated, I very early on was on top of the information that Israel's security services were involved. There's court documentation that shows they managed the person who's blamed to be the assassin. But putting that aside, court documentation, anyone involved in that was given, they lived free.
The Rabin, when he came into the hospital, was noted as having a gunshot wound in his front.
Exactly, and that's now hidden, even though supposedly from the video footage he was shot from the back. There's so many holes in the official story.
With the assassin saying it's a blank.
It's a blank. Right? There's so many holes in the story. But again, I'm talking court documentation that proves and statements from police and intelligence officers saying yes, that people involved were from the security establishment, and yet it's never been dealt with. So since the 1990s, I know there's a deep military intelligence state of tiny elite. I also just recently interviewed people who worked for the NSA, or one person who worked for the NSA, Bruce Bill. I think you've spoken to him, right? And he told me his story about him learning that the American intelligence services had the information about an outbreak of a war that was going to happen in Yom Kippur in 1973, and America did not give that information. I did more of a deep dive, and I came out with the actual statements from Nixon and Kissinger, where they basically laid out their strategy. We're going to let Israel bleed. These are their quotes. They're quoted in official White House and diplomatic information. We're going to let Israel bleed in order then to force a diplomatic plan on them. So that's a playbook.
That hasn't changed.
And that hasn't changed. Well, I explained to people that's what's happening October 7th.
Let me explain something.
I mean, does it make sense that America did not have the intelligence information? If Israel had the intelligence information that October 7th was going to happen, then America would not have that intelligence information as well?
Of course, share everything.
Right.
Look, there's a guy that really needs looking into, Maher Bitar. He was the worst person in the world from our standpoint to get the job of intelligence director for the National Security Council, the NSC. A member of BDS at Georgetown University, a member of Students' Justice for Palestine, worked for UNRWA, all of the above.
Which is basically Hamas.
Which is basically Hamas. And in the weeks leading up to October 7th, why is it that he directed the intelligence community to stop collecting information on Hamas? This is a question that nobody wants to answer. There was a reason for that, and I think it's self-evident. What I discovered when I was working in the intelligence community started off on my first day when all of us in this intake class were given the opportunity to do an analysis on past historical events. And as luck would have it, I drew the Liberty incident.
Oh boy.
Which was fine. I never shy away from contentious issues.
Okay.
So, based on all of the information I had available, which I can't discuss,
okay,
it was clear that it was an accident, a case of misunderstanding, and misidentification. Okay, so I went into this, giving citations, everything. And the commander who was supervising this test looked at me, and the first thing he said was, "Whose side are you on?"
Wow.
Didn't know I was Jewish. In fact, that's the irony of this, my operation. More people were surprised at the fact that I was Jewish when I was caught than the fact that I was an Israeli agent. So I got to see firsthand the kind of anti-Semitism that is rife within the intelligence community. So one thing led to the other, and there was basically an undeclared intelligence embargo that was imposed on Israel following the raid on the Iraqi reactor. And that was instituted by Caspar Weinberger, Secretary of Defense, and Bobby Ray Inman, Admiral, who was the deputy head of the CIA. These two were the most anti-Semitic people I'd ever encountered in government service.
Wow.
So when I realized, on the one hand, there was this intelligence embargo, and on the other hand, I was put on one of the teams that was sitting across the table from our Israeli counterparts, lying to them that we don't have certain things, or giving them misinformation. it suddenly dawned on me that this was leading up to something. And what that something was another 73, where Israel would be caught unawares and bled. And I wasn't going to have any part of that. So, when I was arrested, I want people to understand that even my enemies had to be careful in what they indicted me for.
Well, because if the information got out, it would show clearly that America was
right.
building up for Israel to be attacked.
Right. So what did they indict?
Israelis killed, so they can
force us. What was my
us.
indictment?
Wow. Yeah.
It was providing classified information to Israel without intent to harm the United States. And once everybody realized, well, then what is this about? Then the narrative was changed. If you look at the victim impact statement, which is very interesting, it took me 20 years to get it. It's something that every prisoner gets as a matter of course.
I don't even know what that is.
It's a statement by the Justice Department and by the interested parties, in my case the intelligence community, the Department of Defense, the national security establishment, over exactly what was involved. Not what Weinberger said to the media, or the U.S. attorneys said to congressmen and senators, that were not based on any facts, just verbiage. The biggest sin I created, or I had committed, was that according to our Arab allies, I'm quoting directly, I had made Israel too strong. Alavai. Now, this is an interesting comment. How can you make an ally who had just signed 2 agreements on intelligence sharing and a major non-NATO ally status? How could you make a country like that too strong? You would think just the opposite. And I say this not to justify what I did, but just as an explanation for how crazy the intelligence and the national security establishment was in trying to deal with me at the time. So, I made Israel too strong. And the logic behind that continues to this day, except now we're not talking about Saudi Arabia or Iraq or Egypt, the countries at the time that the U.S. was more interested in helping. But we're talking about terrorists. Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Iran. There you go.
A terror state that harms Americans in America.
Correct. How does this happen? It happens because you have a deep state in the American intelligence establishment, in the national security establishment, I'll leave it that way, that has a visceral hatred of Israel. Whether it's religious-based or not depends on the individual. But it's mostly based on this supposition that Israel is the root cause of all problems in the Middle East, especially those adversely impacting American foreign policy. When you get into this below the surface and you start getting granular, as they say, in the weeds, it's illogical. You can't find any rationale to it that would pass the smell test. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, why is it that in the middle of a war that was promoted by Iran, and during a period of time where they are using Hamas and Hezbollah as diversions from their ongoing nuclear weapons production project, do you have the President of the United States giving Iran a $10 billion sanctions waiver?
Which totals $20 billion, because 10 he gave in November
10,
and now 10 now.
Well, 10 for Qatar before, and now 10 again over the same issue. It's the Iraqi energy bills that they had to pay. Why? What sense does this make? Well, it makes sense if you look at all the people in this third Obama administration. That's why I call him Biden.
Yeah.
That are pro-Iranian. because you have to go back to an individual called Mossadegh, which was an Iranian nationalist slash leftist in the 50s who was overthrown in a coup d'etat sponsored by both the British and the Americans. And this is the great original sin. And these people, I heard lectures back in the 70s and early 80s by university professors who actually said that we owed Iran an apology for what we did. And Obama expressed as much when he became president. Criminal naivete, it goes so far. These are smart people you're dealing with. So what you're dealing with is a level of hatred that's both religious and ideologically based. That's the American deep state. That's the American national security establishment. There are many people, and I know good people within that establishment that are very pro-Israel, that understand that the democracies have to stand together or we will fall separately. These are brilliant, committed, principled people who, like in Israel, are suppressed. Their advancements are cut short. Their views are ridiculed. And they're eventually marginalized and then drummed out of the establishment. Sound familiar?
Yep.
That's the same thing that happened here.
Same thing.
So, with Bibi, I know he's aware of this because we had a lot of very serious discussions about what my experiences were.
Right.
And we had them before I was released, when he came to visit me. And Esther certainly, alayhi shalom, provided him with my insights during my period of incarceration. He knows these. The problem with Bibi is he doesn't know how to handle them. These people here, like Gantz, like Eisenkot, like Gallant, like Halevi, like Kochavi, going back to Yalon, all these high-ranking military officials that collectively represent the high command here, consciously went about demilitarizing Israel by reducing, almost to the point of extinction, our ability at military self-sufficiency.
Right.
This is the litmus test.
Right.
You look and see, what did these people do to augment, to grow, to enhance our ability to act independently in defense of our national security interests? You have to go back to the bedrock, which is military independence, self-sufficiency.
Right.
Dirty word for these people. Why? It wasn't their naivete. They wanted us dependent on the United States. And you heard it.
Yep.
You heard it during the anti-judicial reform protests, that we had to be saved from ourselves by our betters.
Right.
In the Obama administration, and then it was in the Biden administration. Okay, so to the extent that that Israel was made dependent upon the United States, our elder brother, so to speak, then that would be a check on madmen like Bibi and others. Well, here's the problem with that. There comes a point in time where when you look at these members of the high command, you have to ask yourself, was this just a mistake on their part, or was it treason? And I favor the latter characterization. It was treason, high treason. The fact that many of these generals, these leftist generals, later went on to obtain high-paying jobs as representatives of the American military-industrial complex here in Israel.
And in D.C.
And in D.C. just makes their behavior a little more egregious.
Wait, but I want to push you on that. What specifically are you saying is treasonous of what they did or continue to do?
When you, for example, make a deal where, let's say, we develop a gizmo, state of the art. It's quite unusual, one of a kind, perhaps transformative. And you arrange things where the Americans say, we will only buy this if you move your manufacturing process to America. Well, you say, I'm sorry, we're not going to do that. We'll sell you, perhaps at a subsidized price, but we will sell you what we produce here. When you knowingly demilitarize your industrial production base, I call that treason.
So it's interesting because not everyone knows this, but the American foreign aid, and I did a whole video program just on this.
How subsidies for their military-industrial complex.
Right. People don't understand that American foreign policy around the world, which includes Israel, is using foreign military aid in order to control the foreign policies of those countries because it's conditional.
Dependence.
Right.
And on the other hand, it's a subsidy for companies like General Dynamics, Rockwell, Boeing, and others.
Right. So
they get it from both ends, more or less.
So going into the details, before the Obama financial plan, the U.S. assistance, 75% of the money given to Israel had to be spent back to America.
And the small remainder could be spent here.
Right. And Obama's eliminated totally that. Now 100% of the money, and this is what's crazy, because people use this, give us, you're standing up against America, give us back our money. What are you talking about? 100% of the money that America gives goes right back to America to support. It never leaves America. Right, never leaves America.
Never leaves.
But it neutered our ability to produce our own armaments, our own munitions, our own guns, our own bullets, and it's crazy.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Here's an example. At one time, we produced the finest desert combat boot in the world.
In Israel?
In Israel.
Really?
And that plant was shut down.
Yeah, everything. It's all been shut down. Uniforms, everything. And someone recently asked me, he goes, well, why don't we do what we did back before 1948? I don't know if you've ever been to the bullet factory in Rehovot. Yeah. My father's a tour guide there all the time.
I know somebody who worked there.
Right, so my father's a tour guide, takes groups there all the time. If you haven't been to Israel and gone to the bullet factory, contact me, we'll get you a tour. Right? Like Israel secretly developed and manufactured bullets because of the embargo. We weren't allowed anything. And people are asking, why don't we do that today? Israel now has to go back and be independent. We can't be reliant on America anymore.
Let me give you an example. I've talked a lot in various venues about the need for military self-sufficiency. And the one issue that I was hit with all the time was, okay, how are we going to build an F-35, a stealth fighter, the idea? And I finally got so frustrated with this, I came out with a piece where I said, we do this in alliance with the Indians, who are producing a stealth fighter now. And I went through the drill on how we go about doing this in collaboration with the Indians, who are very concerned, like we should be, for maintaining their independence of production. It's called the MRCA. That's the acronym for the Indian stealth fighter. And I showed how we could bring some very, very serious improvements to this plane, both electronically. Look, people don't realize with the F-35, we make the wings, we make the helmet, the weapons queuing system, which is almost like science fiction. We make the digital display, the glass display. We make a lot of the processing algorithms.
We as an Israeli technology.
Technology, and that's just scratching the surface.
Right.
We're deeply embedded in the production of the F-35.
But we give it all over to America. It's all owned.
So why can't we bring this technology that we built on our own and apply it to an aircraft platform that we can produce here with the Indians and sell? Well, it goes back to the Lavi.
Yes.
Which was probably the finest fighter bomber at the time. It was an F-16 killer, and it was made in conjunction with McDonnell Douglas. It was not an all-Israeli program. And what happened was Dov Zakheim, who was considered at the time Weinberger's Kippah Jew, that's what he was called, and General Dynamics, that manufactured still to this day the F-16, killed.
Right. They bought off Israeli officials in the military-industrial complex here in order to pressure Israel.
You want to hear the real story?
And
Talk
kill
to
it.
Moshe Aarons.
Yeah.
He's still suffering from this, where the cabinet, short of one vote, decided to demilitarize our aircraft industry.
Yeah.
We had the best fighter bomber in the world at the time, and we walked away from it because of fear.
Solve that issue, but I do believe you brought up something really important that is also a message I try to give across, and you're helping clarify it, so play with me here. The people, and I'm talking about the people of Israel, the Jewish population in Israel, and the American people, both, names are different, stories are different, but it's the same narrative. The narrative is that there's a tiny, elite, powerful, deep state within both of our countries that are against the people.
Correct.
And they use divisive tactics to divide and conquer and make it as if we're divided in both of our countries.
We saw this during COVID, which was nothing more than a political grab, or a grab for political power by the establishment. That's all it was.
How so? Break it down for people who don't
COVID itself was what I call a scamdemic.
Yeah.
When you actually get into the details of what happened,
Yeah.
Pfizer in particular used this fake epidemic basically as a means of conducting a global trial with an untested drug. Why is it, for example, that governments all around the world have suppressed the side effects, the harmful side effects of this so-called vaccine? Why? Why do they have to be classified? There is a deep state, and it's involved with what we call the Davos crowd, with the biopharmaceutical industries. I mean, there are lots of stakeholders in this.
Right.
One of the most dangerous things that people in the United States and Israel are not aware of is this digital currency that will be run by the Bank of Israel here or by the Federal Reserve. If people want to understand exactly where the deep state is going, they have to go back and understand what this digital currency portends to their freedom. We've seen it exercised already in China, where our money, our currency, is run as a digital currency by government-controlled establishments.
Right, and for people who don't understand, the Chinese government have a social credit score, where depending upon your behavior, you have access to money or you don't have access to money. You can buy a plane ticket or you can't buy a plane ticket. Your kid gets into the good schools, your kids don't get into the good schools, and they control everyone because they control the money because it's all digital.
Now, Senator Cruz is screaming and yelling and raising the alarm about this in the United States, but it's not getting, obviously, the kind of attention it should, because the media is suppressing it.
Right.
Here, people are too diverted.
We're just trying to stand up for our lives.
We're just trying to save ourselves.
Yeah.
While the deep state here
mindset for it
goes about its business.
Right, doing the same thing.
Of undermining our right to decide where and how our money is spent. So this is an example. If people want an example, if COVID is too much for them to wrap their heads around.
Not everyone's there to understand. They don't even want to go there.
Right, they don't want to go there. Then they just look at this digital currency and to figure out what the consequences are of that. Once you realize that, work back. Who's in favor of it? It's like a crime. Who benefits? And then you start understanding the nature of the deep state. What's happening in the United States is reflected here on a much smaller level, but it's equally dangerous to the people of both countries.
Right.
And here, the people behind, for example, the drive for digital currency are the same people, in essence, that are responsible for bringing us to the point of destruction with the anti-judicial reform protests, and then October 7th. The demilitarization of our industrial base.
Right.
They're all linked.
Right, and the way I explain it to people, it's a weakening of the Jewish state of Israel in all different ways, in terms of weakening our identity as the Jewish state, weakening us militarily, defensively, as the Jewish state to be able to defend ourselves. It's all about making us dependent, weakening every aspect of that.
The key thing is to undermine the nature of Jewish identity.
Right.
Because if we're all alike, then we can be manipulated.
Right.
But if we have a sense of a uniqueness, a sense that God has given us a mission, a sense that we are, as I like to repeat what Moshe Rabbeinu said, a nation that dwells apart.
In the positive sense.
In the positive sense.
That's what people have to understand. That's
in the positive sense that we are less susceptible to external and internal manipulation.
Right.
So this is why Esther Alei Shalom always told me, she started off with this by saying, there's a war coming.
And she passed away when?
Just before this all happened. But she said, there's a war coming. And that didn't surprise me because we're always prepared for a war here. Well, what got my attention was what she later said. She said, but I won't be here to help you. And she said, this is not about guns and missiles and tanks. This is about the war over the Jewish identity of the state.
Yep. 100%.
Because to the extent that we are a people that understand our uniqueness and our rights to diplomatic uniqueness, we will be manipulated by outside powers. And those that are fighting the establishment of a Jewish identity here, a coalescence of a Jewish identity, are those who seek to divide us.
Yep.
This was all before the anti-judicial reform protests, all before October 7th.
Yep.
What's a good thing that I've seen is this notion of a Jewish identity, of achdut, of unity, has now really kind of sprung up in the wake of October 7th.
Yep.
It's amazing to realize that the most popular patch amongst the Chayalim in Gaza is the Beit HaMikdash.
Ta-da! You're going right to where I wanted to end the talk with, exactly. And I'll show everyone one of the patches, right? And this one is, so you see the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, and written on the Mashiach, because that's in essence what we're all about. And the reason this is one of the one of the very worn patches by many thousands of soldiers, and believe it or not, my son's he's in his mandatory service, and he had it on his uniform, as I have it on my uniform, but he was told to take it off.
Really?
Because it's political.
That's
so the ones wearing it are the reservists, because the mandatory service are not letting it be, and that shows you the crux of the problem. This is our identity. Like the Jewish people, we're supposed to live in our homelands in order to bring the Mashiach, in order to build the temple. There's nothing political about it. You can argue about the timing.
But wait, there's more, as they say in advertising. What a lot of soldiers have commented on is that virtually every house they've gone into in Gaza has a picture of the Mosque of Omar or Al-Aqsa or something.
Right.
This is not a political fight.
This is a religious war. They're fighting us over religion, correct. And we don't understand
They call it Al-Aqsa flood.
Right.
Okay, look, and this is something that Bibi has not really...
He's not tapping into it. He doesn't see the surveys that are giving him
because of the reason I told you. He doesn't think on this level.
Right.
The fact of the matter is this war is a zero-sum, existential, religious war. Only one of us is going to survive.
Yep.
This is why all this concern over these individuals in Gaza,
the enemy population,
is a weapon that's being used against us. And that is the antidote.
Yep.
Because to the extent that we know why we're fighting and who we are, we'll win.
Yep.
So when they say take the patch off,
right,
because it's political, what they're actually saying is we're just fighting over land.
Right.
This is just a political squabble between two peoples that have equal validity to their notion of ownership of the land.
Right.
No, it isn't.
Right.
That is what we're fighting over.
Yep, and this is why I am optimistic, and that's why I give over that optimism in my analysis of the day-to-day current events and explaining to people that it's the thousands of Israeli soldiers right now wearing this patch. and the thousands more of the soldiers in mandatory service who want to wear this patch, right? Even though they're not being allowed to, because it's the senior echelon who don't understand why we're fighting, and they don't understand our identity, and they're working, unfortunately, to weaken Israel and not properly defend ourselves. But the people were uniting around understanding our identity and our purpose.
That's what Esther was talking about. Yep. The battle over our identity.
Yep. And that's what we're gonna. And that's why we're gonna. That's why I tell people that when I'm talking abroad and I talk in my programs, we are winning and we will win.
Correct.
Despite the elected leaders and despite the official leaders of the army and the intelligence today, they're going to do everything to stop us. They're still going to do everything to stop us. In the middle of the war, they're still trying to do everything to stop us. But they won't, because the people are coming alive. The people are Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, and we are most. And there's a majority of us. Not everyone might think about building the temple right now, but they are unified in purpose.
It's what this represents.
Exactly.
And what this represents is Jewish identity.
Exactly.
We're here not because of our arms or not because we're colonialists, apartheid or colonialists. It's because we are the indigenous people to this region of the world who were given a land by God as our own. That's the short and dirty of it.
Yep.
Look, after Esther died, I didn't know how to memorialize her life. So I helped start a kindergarten in Tel Aviv. Rav Micha Halevi, who is the chief rabbi of Petah Tikva, a great, great man, is the chairman of the board. So at our dedication ceremony, most of the kids there are Chiloni, are leftists. They come from leftist families. And there was a husband and wife there. I couldn't look at her because I think she wore more clothes on the beach than she did at this thing. And he was a high-tech guy with lots of metal in his face and tattoos. All right, fine. I looked beyond that.
All right.
And I said, why did you decide to send your children to a Dati Leumi,
a national
religious school, right in the heart of Tel Aviv? And the husband thought a while and looked at his wife, and she kind of encouraged him to talk. He said, our parents, respective parents, denied us an understanding of God and why we're here. And we want our children to teach us.
Wow.
And the Rav was shaking.
Wow.
And I said, Ken, I said, yes, this is the stuff of the redemption process where the children will teach the parents.
Yeah.
It started.
Yeah.
It can't be stopped.
Yeah.
And they will try. They will try with their last ounce of evil strength to prevent our country from reaching the redemption, the Geula Shlema.
Right.
But it will happen. As Esther said, one way or the other. And most people now do not want it to be with a shmais, a slap, because we've seen actually a very small manifestation or example of what that could involve. What could have happened if Hezbollah had come in at the same time?
Yep, I talk about that's one of the miracles of October 7th.
Correct. What would have happened
don't understand that
if they hadn't stopped at the Nova Music Festival? Their objectives, believe it or not, were Dimona and Tel Aviv.
Yep. Yep, and it's the miracle. I explain to people, it's the miracle that even though the army was not there for hours, so they should have made it to Tel Aviv. They should have made it to Dimona. Tens of thousands could have been massacred on October 7th.
Correct.
The miracle is that the proud King David-like spirit we have today in the Jewish people in the land of Israel, prepared with our gun, that hundreds of individual Israelis ran down south, whether with their uniform, without their uniform, with a gun, without a gun, and they stopped the evil Hamas terrorists and only had them kill 1,200 of us and massacre us that day, because it could have been tens of thousands. And for that we have to be thankful for the miracle of the proud Jewish spirit that exists and is growing day by day.
When someone asks me...
And that's even without the miracle of Hezbollah not joining and Iran not joining.
This was cosmic blindness. When people ask me for my philosophical beliefs on hostage issues, where am I coming from? I said, I'm coming from Ziklag. And they look at me like, what am I talking about? The Ziklag, mentioned in the Bible, was a place where King David's family and his followers were located in the south, and they were kidnapped, all of them, by Amalekites. And King David, who was not king, of course, at that time, didn't know what to do. But ultimately, he decided against negotiating, against paying ransom, against forgetting about them and moving on. He drew his sword, gathered his troops, and went after them, knowing full well each and every one of them could have died in the process. And he won. And he rescued his people. So when people say, for example, with a hostage crisis now, where are you coming from? I tell them, open your Bible.
Mm-hmm.
It's all there. You want to know how we should react towards any issue? Look. Why are we in this mess now? Look at what Shaul HaMelech did
not do with Amalek.
With Agag.
Right. And I'll bring it all together right now. And I'd love to hear your 2 cents about this, and then we'll finish up. I learned this from a friend of mine. He's a Bible teacher. He's a rabbi, and he explained as following. He goes, Bibi Netanyahu today is like King Saul.
He himself admits it.
Oh, he himself admits it?
No, listen to me.
Yeah?
They asked it. He was asked, who in the Bible do you feel an affinity for?
And he said King Saul?
He said King Saul.
No way. Is that on video? Do you have a clip of that?
It's.
But wow. So, but to help people understand, meaning, King Saul was a great king to a point. Meaning he was able to establish the first Jewish kingdom, right? But he wasn't able to follow through and take care of our enemies to basically get rid of it, to move the Jewish people onto the next step of true security and peace in the Holy Land. And that's what King David was necessary for.
But this also, if you follow my criticism of Bibi before, is that what I'm concerned about is the day after.
Right, and basically we understand we're waiting for King David to replace Bibi.
Exactly.
Right, that's so everyone understand the biblical context of understanding today what we're living through. That yes, Bibi Netanyahu has done so much and he continues to do so much, but as Yehonatan has explained to us, he's missing the fear in God that is necessary to take us to the next step. And hence, we're waiting for that King David-like modern figure to replace him to bring the Jewish people.
And we won't know where he comes from.
No clue. Probably come out of that. And now I'm going to throw my last piece, which I'd love to hear your 2 cents, and we'll end with that. I do believe, the second we have our King David-like figure here, and I put the King David-like figure aside, but that we have the continuing inspiration and unity of purpose within the Jewish people in Israel that will in end save ourselves as a people and stand up to our evil enemy, our Amalekite enemy today, which represents the total evil. And I'm like, people just have to go back to the Bible. Amalek is referenced for attacking women and children and elderly and behind. That's what our enemies do today. They're evil. They represent evil, and yet the Western enlightened world is standing by them and stopping Israel from annihilating this evil. But my point is, when Israel when we continue this unity process, unity of purpose, and end the evil, then the freedom-loving world in the other countries of the world will be inspired by us to retain their freedom against the internal and external challenges they're up against in America as well.
Agreed. For us right now, our unity is based on a sense of existence. And that unites everybody.
Right.
That's the first step.
Right.
We have self-survival.
Right.
The next step is why. It's like that husband and wife in our school. God Esther said to me, we didn't know anything about God and we didn't know why we were here. That's October 7th. So first it's about survival. Then the next step is, well then, why are we doing this? Why are we going through this bloody effort to stay alive here? You ask questions. And then that leads inevitably to the mission of the Jewish peoplehood.
Right.
We're not united in death. We are united in life.
Yeah.
Our path is clear.
Right.
You just have to get on it.
Right.
And God will take you to the end.
Yeah. Now I'm taking a time out. I think that is a wonderful way to end off this talk today, Yehonatan. because again, I like helping people better understand reality with all of the fear of that reality that is glossed over and ignored by 99.9% of the messaging we're given out by the media, by organizations, by government, etc., etc. But to help people see the positive, inspiring silver lining behind it all. And I believe we have a beautiful, positive future definitely here for the Jewish people in the land of Israel, because this process is in process.
Correct.
It's begun. We're witnessing it. It's growing. This patch is part of it, and it resembles it. So good times are coming, and I do want non-Jews in America, England, Australia, whatever, also to tap into that positiveness and support the Jews in the Jewish state of Israel in our redemption process here, which in essence will end up assist them.
Our enemies around the world, and even here in Israel, are saying we cannot win a war against ideas. And what are the ideas? The ideas are terror, hatred, bloodshed, Jew hatred, Western hatred, right? To the extent that we win this war decisively against Hamas, we're winning a war against an idea. Your hatred will not defeat us. You will not turn our love for our fellow Jews into a weapon against us.
Right.
And I think if the world sees that this evil idea of Islamofascism can be defeated decisively, there will be a reassessment of what they should do to fight this threat
In their
in their
countries as
own
well.
countries.
Right. Because it's the same Marxist, the red-green Marxist Islamist
That's
alliance out to
beautiful.
destroy
That's exactly
the whole
what it is.
Judeo-Christian value world.
Everybody is fixated. The ADL, for example, was fixated on the black threat. What I mean by black is the fascist threat. But it's the red-green alliance that represents the greatest threat to, on the one hand, Western civilization, and to Judaism. I'm distinguishing them. And Judaism as well.
Right.
So we're fighting not just for ourselves, but for the world
100%.
right now.
Yehonatan, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to have what I really, like in my mind, I think it's been like a real meeting of the minds.
Correct.
A talk of these issues, and really appreciate your insight. And again, thank you for everything you did. Sorry for everything you had to suffer. Thank you for everything you're doing today. But obviously, again, we're believing Jews, so you were chosen for a purpose, and your life experiences are leading you up to be where you are today, and continuing to give to the Jewish people and the freedom-loving world with what you are able to. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
It was my privilege. Thank you.
Everybody, there you go. A meeting of the minds with Yehonatan Pollard. And I just want to thank you for joining me again for another episode of the Pulse of Israel here in our eternal and ancestral homeland, the land of Israel. If you are not yet a subscriber, just go to pulseofisrael.com and click to subscribe. And if you like this video and you want to support us being able to have our videos get seen by more people, because we are heavily censored across social media, so we are support driven. So please just go click on the donate button every once in a while on pulseofisrael.com. And until next time, from the beautiful, ancestral, biblical, and indivisible capital of Jerusalem since King David's time, this is Avi Abela for the Pulse of Israel. Shalom. Thanks for joining, everyone.